After my husband's sudden death, I attended my nephew's first birthday party. That's when my own sister stood in front of 50 people and announced that her son was actually my husband's child. She pulled out a fake will demanding half of our $1.7 million home. My parents immediately took her side, pressuring me to hand over the property to keep the peace. They thought a grieving widow would easily back down to avoid a scandal, but they were wrong. I had quietly set a devastating trap and let her walk right into it. If you've ever dealt with people who mistake silence for weakness, hit like and subscribe to see how I made this betrayal pay the price. Seattle didn't just rain that morning. It wept. Cold drops drummed a relentless rhythm against the black umbrellas circling the open grave. I stood in the very front row. The wet earth soaked through my black pumps and the heavy wool of my dress blues uniform clung to my shoulders. My spine was locked straight. My hands rested perfectly still behind my back. That was the training. You do not break. Not when the rifle volley sounds. Not when the flag is folded. The priest was halfway through the final prayer when the crunch of gravel cut through the silence. Evelyn was 25 minutes late to my husband's funeral. She stumbled up the slight incline of the cemetery hill, struggling to balance on black stilettos. Her dress was skin-tight cut, dangerously low, and entirely inappropriate for a burial. On her hip, she carried her 1-year-old son, Leo. "I'm so sorry," Evelyn sobbed. Her voice carried over the headstones, loud and theatrical. The traffic was a nightmare. She didn't stand at the back of the crowd. She pushed her way right to the front, stopping directly across the plot from me. Leo squirmed against her chest, uncomfortable in the cold. Evelyn buried her face into the toddler's neck and let out a trembling, dramatic wail. My mother, Helen, immediately broke rank. She dropped her umbrella, stepping right over the muddy grass to wrap her arms around Evelyn. "Oh, my sweet girl," my mother cooed, stroking Evelyn's hair. "Shh, it's okay. We're right here." My father, Richard, was right behind her. He placed a heavy protective hand on Evelyn's shoulder, shielding her from the rain. Neither of them had spoken a single word to me since we arrived at the cemetery gates. I kept my eyes fixed on the polished mahogany of the casket. Thomas was 40 years old, a remote software architect who spent his weekends building birdhouses in our backyard. A sudden cardiac arrest on a Tuesday afternoon. No warning signs. No chance to say goodbye. Just a phone call from the hospital that permanently altered the trajectory of my life. 2 hours later, the house was full. Thomas and I bought this property 3 years ago. It sat on a bluff overlooking the Puget Sound, secured with a VA loan and my life savings. It was a quiet sanctuary filled with natural light, his architectural sketches, and the life we built between my deployments. Now the hardwood floors echoed with the murmurs of extended family. I retreated to the kitchen. I stood at the sink, running hot water over the same ceramic coffee mug for the third time, just to keep my hands occupied. The noise of the running water drowned out the pitying whispers from the living room. Footsteps clicked against the tile behind me. Evelyn walked in. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the ceiling, the custom cabinetry, the massive windows facing the ocean. She trailed her fingers over the edge of the quartz kitchen island. "This quartz must cost a fortune to maintain," she murmured. I didn't answer. I kept scrubbing the mug. She walked past me, peering into the formal dining room. "Thomas always had such expensive taste. This house is massive for just 2 people." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Well, for just 1 person now." I turned the faucet off. Evelyn sighed, shifting Leo to her other hip. She offered me a soft, deeply sympathetic smile, the kind of smile she used when she wanted something. "Thomas always understood how hard it is for me," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Making ends meet as a single mother. He had such a big heart, Clara. He told me. He promised me he'd always make sure Leo and I were taken care of." I picked up a dish towel. I dried my hands, pressing the fabric into my palms until the skin turned white. I turned to face my sister. "Don't put words in a dead man's mouth, Evelyn," I said. My voice was quiet, level. "He is not here to defend himself." Her eyes flashed, a brief, sharp spark of pure venom. But she masked it instantly. Her lower lip quivered and she pulled Leo a little closer to her chest, playing the victim perfectly. Before I could ask her to leave my kitchen, she reached into her designer handbag, a bag I knew she couldn't afford on her fluctuating spa salary. She pulled out a light blue envelope and slid it across the quartz counter. "Leo's first birthday party is this Saturday," Evelyn said. Her voice returned to that sweet, sugary pitch. "Please come, Clara. There's going to be a special tribute to Thomas, a big surprise. He would want you to be there." She didn't wait for my answer. She turned on her heel and walked back into the living room, leaving the blue envelope sitting on the counter like a ticking clock. Saturday afternoon brought a rare, blinding sun to the Seattle suburbs. Evelyn's rented backyard was packed. 50 people crowded around plastic folding tables, shouting over a portable speaker blasting pop music. Blue and silver balloons clung to the chain-link fence. I stood near the side gate, nursing a plastic cup of ice water. Several aunts and cousins had offered me tight, uncomfortable smiles before quickly steering their conversations elsewhere. Being a widow made people nervous. Being a widow at a 1-year-old's birthday party made them actively avoid you. I didn't mind the distance. I stayed quiet, watching the chaos from the perimeter. At exactly 3 o'clock, the music cut off. Evelyn tapped a metal spoon against her wine glass. The sharp clinking drew everyone's attention to the center of the patio. She stood next to a towering tiered cake Leo balanced effortlessly on her hip. She wore a pristine white sundress. Her hair was perfectly curled. "Thank you all for coming," Evelyn started. Her voice wavered. It was a masterful crack of emotion. The chatter across the yard died instantly. "This past month has been unbearable for our family." Evelyn looked down at Leo, brushing a curl from his forehead. She wiped a single tear from her cheek. "Thomas was a wonderful man. He had a heart big enough to take care of everyone he loved." My father nodded solemnly from the front row. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "But Thomas and I shared something else." Evelyn continued, her voice gaining a fragile, rehearsed strength. "A bond. A secret one." The silence in the yard deepened. Someone shifted their weight. The plastic grass crunched loudly. "Leo isn't my ex-boyfriend's baby." Evelyn lifted her chin, looking directly at me across the sea of guests. "He is Thomas's son." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father turned pale. The whispers started immediately, a low buzzing hive of shock and scandal. Evelyn didn't stop. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "We had a moment of weakness," she said over the rising murmurs. "Thomas felt terribly guilty, but before he passed, he wanted to make sure his son was provided for. He left this document. It states clearly that Leo is entitled to half of the coastal house." Every single head turned toward me. I could feel the weight of their stares. Pity, morbid fascination, disgust. I set my water cup down on the nearest table. The ice clinked against the plastic. I walked slowly through the parted crowd, my boots completely silent on the grass. When I reached the center of the patio, I stopped an arm's length away from my sister. "May I asked softly. Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes searching my face for a crack. Finding none, she handed me the paper. It was standard printer paper. The signature at the bottom was a decent forgery mimicking the loops from our holiday cards. I scanned the typed paragraphs. My eyes stopped at the second section detailing the alleged affair and the timeline of conception. October 2022. I stared at the ink. My teeth clamped down on the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. A laugh, a sharp, hysterical, violent laugh clawed its way up my throat. My chest tightened painfully as I forced it back down. I locked my jaw. I let my shoulders drop just a fraction, allowing my hands to tremble slightly as they held the edges of the paper. Evelyn stepped closer. "I'm sorry, Clara," she whispered, projecting her voice just enough for the front row to hear. "We're family. I don't want to drag this through court drama. Just transfer half the property and we can handle this quietly." I carefully folded the paper along its original crease. I handed it back to her. "Oh, I see," I said. My voice was perfectly flat. "Thank you for letting me know." Evelyn blinked. Her perfectly painted eyebrows drew together. The script in her head hadn't accounted for this response. "That's it?" I didn't answer. I turned around and walked back the way I came. I walked past my mother, who was already stepping toward Evelyn. I walked past my father's frozen stare. I pushed open the chain-link gate and walked down the driveway to my car. I got in. I shut the door. The heavy thud of the car door cut off the noise from the backyard completely. The silence of the cabin wrapped around me. I started the engine. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a secure number I hadn't used since my last deployment. It rang twice. "Marcus," I said when the line connected. "I need you to pull Thomas's file from the JAG registry. We have a situation." The doorbell rang at 8 o'clock Sunday morning. I opened the heavy oak door. My parents stood on the porch. Neither carried a casserole dish or a sympathy card. My mother walked past me without a word, shedding her raincoat. My father followed, closing the door softly behind him. I went to the kitchen, poured 2 cups of black coffee, and set them on the quartz island. "We need to talk," Helen said. She wrapped both hands around the warm mug but didn't drink. "Evelyn is a wreck. She barely slept. You walking out of her yard like that. It was cruel, Clara." I leaned against the sink, watching the steam rise from their cups. "She's a single mother." Helen's voice pitched higher, thickening with unshed tears. "She's been struggling for a whole year. You have a stable income. You have your benefits. Splitting the value of this property won't put you on the street." My father cleared his throat, looking down at his shoes. "It's Thomas's son, Clara. We have to think of the child. It's what Thomas wanted." "Is it?" I asked. "You were gone," Helen snapped. The tears vanished instantly, replaced by a sharp defensive edge. "You were deployed overseas. You chose your career over being a present wife. Can you really blame him for finding comfort somewhere else?" The kitchen went completely silent. Only the low hum of the refrigerator filled the space. I didn't yell. I didn't defend my marriage. I looked at the 2 people who raised me, seeing them with absolute terrifying clarity. I rubbed my temples, letting out a long, heavy sigh. I slumped my shoulders forward just an inch, dropping my gaze to the hardwood floor. "Fine," I said softly. My mother blinked, caught off guard. "Fine." I looked up, meeting her eyes. "If that piece of paper is really what Thomas wanted, I won't fight you in the living room, but this is a mortgage. It's a massive asset. We have to do this legally." My father nodded slowly, relief washing over his face. "Of course. Evelyn just wants her fair share." "Then tell Evelyn to take that document to the probate court," I said. My voice was steady, perfectly reasonable. "Have her file it officially with the county clerk. If a judge reviews it and rules it valid, I will hand over the keys and walk away." Helen's shoulders relaxed. A triumphant smile touched the corners of her mouth. "That's all she wants, Clara. See, we can handle this like a family." "Yes," I said. "Like a family." They finished their coffee and left 10 minutes later, deeply satisfied. 2 days passed. On Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text message from Evelyn, an image file followed by a short line of text. I tapped the screen. It was a photograph of a stamped document resting on a wooden counter. "King County Superior Court, Probate Division. Case filed." Underneath the image was her message. "The clerk said it should be processed quickly. Talk to you soon, sis." I stared at the little yellow smiley face. I didn't reply. I pressed the lock button on the side of the device. The screen went black. Bait taken. The security checkpoint at Joint Base Lewis McChord took 12 minutes to clear. I parked outside the brick building housing the legal corps, the morning fog still clinging to the evergreens. Captain Marcus Lee was already at his desk. 2 monitors glowed in the dim, windowless office. He didn't offer empty condolences when I walked in. He just pointed to the heavy chair opposite his desk. "I pulled the file," Marcus said, clicking his mouse. I sat down. And he turned the right monitor toward me. "Thomas executed his last will and testament here in this exact office 3 weeks before your unit deployed to Stuttgart. Fully notarized, witnessed by 2 commissioned officers." He tapped a key. A video file opened. Thomas sat in the chair I was currently occupying, looking directly into a webcam. He stated his full name, his sound mind, and his sole beneficiary: me. I watched the screen. The pixelated image of my husband was the first moving footage I had seen of him since the funeral. I kept my breathing even. "Download a certified copy," I said. "Already done," Marcus replied. He leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "I also ran the timeline on the document your sister filed with the county. October 2022. Right." Marcus nodded. "So, I accessed the defense database and pulled the CAC swipe logs for USAG Stuttgart." He dragged a spreadsheet onto the screen. Rows of precise military timestamps filled the display. "Thomas flew out of Seattle-Tacoma on October 2nd. Marcus read off the screen. "He swiped his dependent ID at the Stuttgart main gate on October 3rd. He didn't swipe out for a return flight to the States until April." I looked at the raw data. 6 months, inside the wire, 4,000 miles away from Seattle. "She didn't do her homework," I said quietly. "A real estate agent trying to push a forged document on a federally backed property." Marcus shook his head, a dry, humorless chuckle escaping him. "She isn't just playing family drama, Clara. She's poking the federal government. I can make one phone call and have this thrown out of civil court by noon." "No." I met his gaze. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Let her," I said. "Let her think she's winning. Let her walk into that courtroom and put that forgery on the official record under oath." Marcus studied me for a long moment. A slow, understanding nod followed. He turned back to his left monitor, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he accessed the next set of archives. "All right, let's make sure the net is tight," he murmured, pulling up Thomas's extended medical history to attach to the probate file. He scrolled down, stopped, scrolled up a fraction of an inch. The rhythmic clicking of his mouse ceased. The silence in the small office suddenly felt heavy. Marcus leaned closer to the screen, his brow furrowed. "Clara," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "What is it?" He didn't look away from the monitor. He hit print. The laser printer in the corner hummed to life. "The Stuttgart logs are bulletproof," Marcus said, grabbing the single sheet of warm paper from the tray. He slid it face down across the desk toward me. "But you won't even need them." "Why?" "Because of what happened when Thomas was 15. The doorbell rang at 2 in the afternoon on Thursday. I was at the kitchen island organizing a stack of financial statements. I didn't immediately move. The heavy brass knocker pounded against the wood 3 times in rapid succession, followed by the muffled sound of Evelyn's voice. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Evelyn stood on the porch. She wore a tailored beige trench coat, a designer silk scarf, and oversized sunglasses. A man stood next to her. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a cheap navy suit, holding a digital camera and a leather portfolio. "We're coming in," Evelyn announced, pushing past me into the foyer before I could step aside. The man hesitated on the welcome mat, glancing at me. "Come on, Greg," Evelyn called out from the hallway, already slipping off her heels. "We have a lot of ground to cover." Greg offered a tight, uncomfortable nod and stepped inside. I closed the door. I reached into the breast pocket of my cardigan, pressed the side button on my phone to begin a voice recording, and let the device drop back into the fabric. I leaned against the entryway wall, crossing my arms. "What is this, Evelyn?" I asked. She turned around, running a hand along the wainscoting. "This is Greg. He's an appraiser. Since my lawyer officially filed the probate claim yesterday, we need an accurate inventory of the estate's assets. For the split." She didn't wait for my permission. She gestured for Greg to follow her into the living room. I walked behind them, keeping a measured distance of 6 feet. I watched Greg lift his camera. The shutter clicked as he photographed the custom built-in bookshelves, the stone fireplace, and the sweeping view of the Puget Sound through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Make sure you get the chandelier," Evelyn instructed, pointing to the modern glass fixture hanging above the dining table. "Thomas paid almost $8,000 for that. We'll probably have to auction it. I definitely want to replace it with something warmer when I move in." Greg scribbled something on his notepad. I kept my breathing steady. I watched her mentally divide the house, measuring the walls, assessing the furniture, and carving up the life Thomas and I had built. "The kitchen appliances are high-end," Evelyn noted, running a manicured fingernail over the stainless steel refrigerator. "Sub-Zero. Take a picture of the serial numbers, Greg." She moved with absolute terrifying confidence. Filing that piece of paper with the county clerk had completely untethered her from reality. She truly believed the legal system was a vending machine she put a lie in, and she was about to get a house out. "Let's check the master suite," she said, turning toward the staircase. "The bedrooms are upstairs," I said, my voice flat. Evelyn smiled at me. "I know." She led the way up the oak stairs. Greg trailed behind, his camera hanging from a strap around his neck. He looked increasingly nervous, occasionally shooting me a glance. I gave him nothing. No anger, no tears, no resistance. Evelyn bypassed the guest rooms and walked straight into Thomas's home office. This room had remained untouched since the hospital called. His drafting table was still covered in architectural blueprints. His favorite ceramic mug sat near the monitor, a dark ring of dried coffee at the bottom. His reading glasses were folded neatly on top of a stack of mail. Evelyn walked right up to the heavy mahogany desk. "This is a nice desk," she remarked. She pulled the center drawer open. The sound of the wood sliding against the metal track sent a sharp spike of adrenaline through my chest. I planted my feet firmly into the carpet. I did not move. She sifted through his pens, his notepads, and his charging cables. Then she pulled open the bottom right drawer. "Oh wow," she breathed. Evelyn reached in and pulled out a heavy, dark green velvet box. She snapped the lid open. Inside rested Thomas's vintage Rolex Submariner. It was an inheritance from his grandfather, a watch he only wore on our anniversaries. Greg stepped forward, his eyes widening slightly. "That's a serious timepiece. You should probably leave that in the safe, Evelyn." "It belongs to the estate," Evelyn replied smoothly. She took the watch out of the velvet cushion. "Which means half of its value belongs to my son. I'm taking it for safekeeping. You never know what goes missing during these disputes." She dropped the Rolex directly into her handbag. Greg shifted his weight, looking at me. "Ma'am, I didn't advise her to do that. I'm just here to appraise the fixtures." "It's fine," I said evenly. I looked directly at Evelyn's handbag. "Take whatever you think belongs to you." Evelyn snapped her purse shut. She leaned against Thomas's desk, tilting her head to study me. The oversized sunglasses sat on top of her head, now revealing the cold, triumphant gleam in her eyes. "You're taking this surprisingly well, Clara," she said. "I prefer to let the court handle property disputes." Evelyn laughed. A short, breathy sound that bounced off the walls of Thomas's quiet office. "You always were so rigid," she said, stepping closer to me. "So obsessed with protocol. That's why he came to me, you know. He needed someone who actually knew how to feel." She paused, letting the silence stretch, waiting for a crack in my composure. I stared at her. He loved me enough to hide our child from you, Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a vicious, calculated whisper. Are you sure you really knew your husband, sis? I looked at her perfectly made-up face. I looked at the purse holding a stolen watch. I felt the slight weight of the phone recording in my pocket. Maybe you're right, I said. My voice was completely void of emotion. I'm about to understand everything in court. Evelyn smiled, satisfied. Come on, Greg, we're done here. She brushed past my shoulder, her heavy perfume lingering in the air. Greg hurried after her, keeping his head down. I followed them back down the stairs and watched from the foyer as they walked out the front door. I locked the deadbolt. I pulled my phone from my pocket and stopped the recording. I uploaded the audio file directly to my secure cloud drive, labeling it with the date, time, and the word larceny. 3 hours later, a white delivery truck pulled into my driveway. A courier in a dark blue uniform walked up to the porch carrying a thick, rigid cardboard envelope. I signed for it on his digital pad, thanked him, and carried the package to the kitchen island. The return address was printed in stark black ink: Boston General Hospital, Department of Medical Records and Archives. I grabbed a pair of scissors from the drawer and sliced through the reinforced tape at the top. I pulled out a thick stack of papers. They were copies of old yellowed medical charts, heavily redacted in places but perfectly legible where it mattered. The dates printed in the top right corners spanned from 25 years ago. I flipped past the admission forms and the consent waivers, searching for the final attending physician summary. I found it on page 14. I smoothed the paper flat against the quartz counter. I read the typewritten paragraphs detailing a 15-year-old boy's brutal battle with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I read the exact dates of his aggressive chemotherapy regimens. I read the dosages of the radiation treatments that had saved his life. My eyes moved to the final paragraph. The prognosis. Patient has achieved full remission. However, due to the sustained intensity of the alkylating agents used during the chemotherapy protocol, the patient has sustained complete irreversible sterility. Future biological reproduction is medically impossible. I stared at the words, medically impossible. The afternoon sun shifted, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. The house was entirely silent. Evelyn had a forged will. She had a stolen watch. She had a lawyer, an appraiser, and an audience of 50 family members who believed her story. I had the truth. I carefully placed the medical file back into the cardboard envelope. I picked up my phone, dialing Marcus's number. Captain Lee, he answered on the first ring. The package arrived, I said. Does it confirm the timeline? It confirms everything. I looked toward the staircase, toward the empty office where she had stood just hours ago. Submit the motion for a hearing. Let's go to court. The smell of pot roast and rosemary hit me the second I stepped through my parents' front door on Wednesday evening. It was a smell from my childhood. A smell meant to signal safety, warmth, and family. Tonight, it felt like a staged production. I took off my coat and hung it on the brass hook in the hallway. The dining room table was already set. Fine china, crystal water glasses, the good silver. Evelyn sat at the far end of the table, cutting a piece of bread into tiny squares for Leo, who babbled happily in his high chair. She wore a soft pastel cashmere sweater, the picture of an exhausted, devoted mother. My father sat at the head of the table, nursing a glass of scotch. He didn't meet my eyes when I walked in. He gave a stiff nod toward the empty chair across from Evelyn. Sit down, Clara, Helen said, emerging from the kitchen with a ceramic serving dish. Dinner is ready. We're doing this like civilized people. I pulled out my chair and sat. For 20 minutes, the dining room was filled with the excruciating sound of silverware scraping against porcelain. No one mentioned Thomas. No one mentioned the house. Helen filled the silence with rapid, nervous chatter about the neighborhood association and the weather forecast. Evelyn chewed slowly, taking small sips of her wine. She looked completely relaxed. When the last of the plates were cleared, Helen wiped her hands on a linen napkin and sat down heavily. The atmosphere shifted. The air in the room grew instantly dense. Evelyn reached into her designer tote bag resting on the floor. She pulled out a manila folder and placed it in the center of the mahogany table. She slid it across the polished wood until it stopped directly in front of my empty water glass. I didn't touch it. I looked at the tab. Settlement agreement. "What is this?" I asked. "It's a way out," Evelyn said smoothly. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "My lawyer drafted it this afternoon. It's an out-of-court settlement." I opened the folder. The document was 3 pages long. The legal jargon was dense, but the core demands were highlighted in bold print on the second page. It required me to immediately sign over a 50% equity stake in the coastal house to a trust under Leo's name, with Evelyn acting as the sole trustee. I kept reading. My eyes caught a secondary clause near the bottom. Party A, Clara, agrees to cover the legal retainment fee of $5,000 incurred by Party B, Evelyn, due to the necessity of legal mediation. She was asking for half my home, and she wanted me to pay the lawyer who helped her try to steal it. "Court is so expensive, Clara," Evelyn said, her tone dripping with manufactured sympathy. "And it's so public. Do we really want Thomas's mistakes dragged out in front of a judge? The neighbors would talk. His co-workers would find out. I'm trying to protect his memory." I turned the page. "We just want peace," Helen said. Her voice took on that soft, pleading quality she always used when she wanted to smooth over Evelyn's disasters. "Family comes first, Clara. We have to look out for each other. Just sign the paper. We can put this ugly business behind us and move on." "It's a fair compromise," my father added quietly, finally looking up from his empty glass. "It saves everyone a lot of pain." I looked at the 3 of them. A united front. Evelyn pulled a sleek silver pen from her purse and laid it gently on top of the contract. I reached out and picked up the pen. The metal was cool against my skin. I clicked the top. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room. Helen let out a long, shuddering breath of relief. Evelyn's lips twitched upward into a victorious smirk. She reached for her wineglass, ready to celebrate. I hovered the tip of the pen over the signature line. I held it there for 3 full seconds. Then I clicked the pen closed. I set it down on the table exactly where Evelyn had placed it. I pushed the manila folder back across the mahogany wood. "No," I said. Evelyn's wineglass stopped halfway to her mouth. Helen sat up perfectly straight, the relief instantly vanishing from her face. "What do you mean, no, Clara? Stop being difficult. We agreed to handle this privately." "I don't sign binding financial agreements transferring real estate at a dinner table," I said, my voice completely level. "The military taught me never to surrender an asset without a direct order. We have a legal system for a reason." Helen's face flushed a deep mottled red. She slammed her hand flat against the table, making the silverware rattle. "It is just a signature," Helen shouted. The sweet, pleading mother vanished, replaced by a vicious, desperate enabler. "Why are you so selfish? You are going to put your own sister and your nephew on the street just out of spite." I stood up. I pushed my chair back. "If her will is real," I said, looking directly at my mother, "the judge will force me to hand over the keys anyway. What is she afraid of?" Helen opened her mouth, but no words came out. I turned my gaze to Evelyn. The smirk was gone. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes narrowed into dark slits. "Friday," I said to her. "Don't be late." I walked out of the dining room, retrieved my coat from the hallway, and left the house. I didn't look back. The cold night air hit my face as I walked down the driveway to my car. I got in, started the engine, and merged onto the damp suburban street. 10 minutes into the drive, my phone rang through the car's Bluetooth speakers. It was David, my civil attorney. "Press 1 to answer," the automated voice prompted. I tapped the steering wheel button. "Go ahead, David." The clerk just confirmed the docket. David's voice filled the cabin, crisp and professional. The judge scheduled the preliminary hearing for 9 o'clock this Friday morning. I watched the streetlights pass by in a blur of yellow. Did she withdraw the document? No, David replied. It is officially logged into the system. She submitted that piece of paper as Exhibit A. I pulled up to a red light. The intersection was completely empty. Perfect, I said. Thursday morning started at 0500. I sat at the kitchen island, a black coffee cooling in my mug. I opened my laptop and navigated to my banking portal to pay the monthly utility bill. The screen loaded. A thick, bright red banner spanned the top of the dashboard. Restricted access. The accounts ending in 4402 and 8119 have been temporarily frozen, pending a judicial hold. Please contact your branch for details. I clicked on the mortgage tab. Another red banner. A preliminary injunction has been placed on this property. My phone vibrated against the court's counter. It was David. I picked it up. Did you log into your accounts yet? He asked. His voice was clipped. Just now. Evelyn's attorney filed an emergency ex parte motion late yesterday afternoon, David explained. Standard aggressive tactic in contested probate. They convinced the duty judge that you might try to liquidate the estate or drain the joint accounts before tomorrow's hearing. The judge granted a temporary freeze on the property deed and a portion of your liquid assets. I looked at the red text on my screen. I can't move my own money. Only the funds tied to Thomas's name and the house. David corrected. It's temporary, Clara. It's meant to panic you. It's a pressure tactic to force you back to the settlement table before we see the judge. It's working for them, I said. They think they have me pinned. Tomorrow at 9, David said. Bring the portfolio. The line went dead. I closed the laptop. The reality of the situation hung heavy in the quiet kitchen. The legal system was a machine. It didn't care about truth until the truth was entered into evidence. Right now, on paper, Evelyn had a valid claim, and the machine was acting to protect her. At noon, the screen of my phone lit up with an incoming text message. It was a photograph from Evelyn. The image showed a massive L-shaped white boucle sectional sofa sitting in a high-end furniture showroom. A price tag dangled from the armrest, the numbers blurred, but the luxury branding clear. A second message followed immediately. Putting down the deposit today. My lawyer told me about the freeze. You should have just signed the paper on Wednesday, Clara. It's out of your hands now. See you in court tomorrow. I stared at the text. I didn't type a reply. I didn't block the number. I simply turned the screen off and set the phone face down on the counter. That night, the house was perfectly still. I walked upstairs and pushed open the door to Thomas's office. The desk drawer remained exactly as Evelyn had left it, slightly ajar, the green velvet box missing. I sat down in his heavy leather chair. I unclasped the silver chain from around my neck. The metal dog tags clinked softly as I laid them flat on the mahogany wood. I pulled a black leather portfolio from my briefcase and unzipped it. I placed the documents on the desk. 3 distinct stacks. Stack 1, the certified, notarized, and video-backed last will and testament from the Judge Advocate General's office executing my sole inheritance. Stack 2, the encrypted common access card swipe logs from United States Army Garrison Stuttgart, placing Thomas 4,000 miles away from Seattle during the entire month of October. Stack 3, the heavily redacted sealed medical file from Boston General Hospital, confirming a permanent, irreversible biological impossibility. I picked up the first stack. I tapped the edges against the desktop until the papers were perfectly flush. I slid them into the first compartment of the portfolio. I repeated the process with the second stack. Then the third. I zipped the leather portfolio closed. The interlocking metal teeth made a sharp, definitive sound in the quiet room. I looked at the empty velvet box in the open drawer. I picked up my dog tags, sliding the cold metal back over my head, feeling them settle against my collarbone. The target is in the minefield, I whispered to the empty room. Safety off. Friday morning brought a bitter, biting wind off the Puget Sound. I parked 3 blocks away from the King County Courthouse. I walked the rest of the way, the heavy leather portfolio tucked securely under my arm. My dark charcoal suit was pressed perfectly sharp. My heels clicked a steady, unhurried rhythm against the concrete. The courthouse was a towering structure of gray stone and glass. Inside, the air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I placed my briefcase on the security conveyor belt. I walked through the metal detector. The machine remained silent. I retrieved my bag and walked toward the elevators. The probate division was on the 4th floor. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. The hallway was lined with polished wooden benches and heavy double doors leading to the individual courtrooms. I stepped out. Evelyn was already there. She sat on a bench near the entrance of courtroom 4B. She had dressed for an audience. She wore a high-necked black blouse, tailored slacks, and a delicate silver cross necklace. Her makeup was minimal, expertly applied to make her look pale, exhausted, and remarkably brave. Leo was sitting on her lap, dressed in a tiny navy sweater, completely oblivious to the gravity of the building. My parents flanked her. Helen sat on her left, holding a tissue, whispering something soothing into Evelyn's ear. Richard stood on her right, his arms crossed, defensively standing guard over his youngest daughter. A man in a sharp gray suit stood in front of them, reviewing a stack of papers on a clipboard. Evelyn's attorney. They looked up as my footsteps echoed down the marble hallway. Helen's eyes narrowed instantly. She lifted her chin, a clear gesture of defiance. Richard looked away, focusing his attention on a brass plaque on the wall. Evelyn didn't look away. She watched me approach. A slow, subtle smile crept onto her face. It was the smile of someone who had already spent the money. Someone who believed the heavy wooden doors behind her were the gateway to her new life. David stepped out from a small alcove near the water fountain. He buttoned his suit jacket and fell into step beside me. "They're calling the docket in 2 minutes," David said quietly. I didn't break eye contact with my sister. "I'm ready," I said. "All rise." The bailiff's voice echoed against the high vaulted ceiling of courtroom 4B. I stood. Beside me, David buttoned his suit jacket. Across the aisle, Evelyn rose gracefully, holding Leo. Helen and Richard sat in the gallery directly behind her, their posture stiff with anticipation. Judge Miller entered from a side door. She was a woman in her late 50s, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a heavy black robe. She took her seat at the elevated bench, sorted through a stack of manila folders, and peered down at the courtroom. "Be seated," Judge Miller said. "We are here for a preliminary hearing regarding the estate of Thomas Vance. I have an emergency ex parte motion and a submitted last will and testament marked as Exhibit A. Counsel for the petitioner, you may proceed." The man in the sharp gray suit stepped up to the podium. "Thank you, Your Honor." He began, his voice smooth and practiced. "My name is Arthur Vance, representing Evelyn Davis. We are here today to ensure that the true final wishes of the deceased are honored." He gestured toward Evelyn. She looked down at Leo, perfectly playing the part of the grieving, abandoned mother. "Thomas Vance was a man with a heavy conscience," the lawyer continued. "Prior to his sudden passing, he drafted the document before you, Exhibit A. It acknowledges his biological son Leo and clearly stipulates that 50% of his primary real estate asset be transferred to a trust for the child's care. We ask the court to validate this document and make the temporary freeze on the estate permanent until the asset can be divided." Judge Miller looked at the paper on her desk. Then she looked over at our table. "Counsel for the respondent," she asked. David stood up. He picked up the thick black leather portfolio from our table and walked to the podium. "Your Honor," David said, his voice carrying a sharp clinical edge, "we do not contest that Thomas Vance was a man who planned carefully for the future. We do, however, contest Exhibit A in its entirety. It is a fraudulent document." Evelyn let out a loud, offended gasp. Helen leaned forward in her pew, glaring at the back of David's head. A bold claim, counselor, Judge Miller noted. Do you have the evidence to support it? I have 3 exhibits, Your Honor, David said. He unzipped the portfolio. He pulled out the first stack of papers. First, I submit the actual last will and testament of Thomas Vance, executed 3 years ago at the Judge Advocate General's office at Joint Base Lewis McChord. It is notarized by a federal military officer and accompanied by a sworn video deposition. It names his wife Clara as the sole beneficiary. The bailiff took the documents from David and handed them up to the bench. Judge Miller flipped through the pages. Her eyes scanned the federal seals. Evelyn's lawyer shifted his weight. Your Honor, a newer will supersedes an older one. Our document was drafted merely a year ago. I am aware of how time works, Mr. Vance, Judge Miller said dryly. She looked back at David. Proceed. Let us examine the timeline of this newer document, David said. He pulled out the second stack of papers. Exhibit A claims conception occurred during a clandestine affair in October of 2022. David handed the second stack to the bailiff. These are the encrypted common access card swipe logs from the United States Department of Defense. David stated, his voice ringing clearly through the silent room. Throughout the entire month of October 2022, Thomas Vance was residing as a military dependent inside USAG Stuttgart in Germany. He did not board a flight back to the United States until April. The courtroom went dead silent. Evelyn's posture snapped rigid. The soft, grieving mother routine vanished. Her head whipped around to stare at her lawyer, panic finally piercing her confident facade. That's a lie, Evelyn blurted out, her voice shrill. He flew back. He took a private flight to see me. He didn't use his regular passport. Judge Miller struck her gavel once, a sharp cracking sound like a gunshot. Control your client, Mr. Vance, or I will have her removed. The lawyer grabbed Evelyn's arm, pulling her back down into her seat. He looked at the copies of the DOD logs the bailiff had handed him. The color drained completely from his face. David didn't give them a second to breathe. He reached into the portfolio for the final time. He pulled out the heavy sealed cardboard envelope from Boston General Hospital. Your Honor, David said, his voice dropping slightly, stripping away any courtroom theatrics. Even if we ignore the federal travel logs, the petitioner's claim is a biological impossibility. I submit the sealed medical history of Thomas Vance requested directly from his original oncology team. The bailiff carried the envelope to the bench. Judge Miller broke the seal. She pulled out the yellowed charts. When Thomas was 15 years old, he underwent aggressive chemotherapy and radiation for acute lymphoblastic leukemia. David said into the quiet room. The treatment saved his life. It also left him completely and irreversibly sterile. Thomas Vance could not father a child in October of 2022. He could not father a child at any point in his adult life. The silence in courtroom 4B was absolute. I kept my eyes locked on Evelyn. She wasn't looking at the judge. She wasn't looking at her lawyer. She was staring at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization hit her crashing through the layers of her arrogance. She hadn't just lied to our parents. She had walked into a court of law, handed a federal judge a forged document, and tried to steal a federally backed property based on a biological impossibility. Judge Miller finished reading the medical summary. She set the papers down slowly. She took off her wire-rimmed glasses. She looked directly at Evelyn's lawyer. Mr. Vance, the judge said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Did you verify the authenticity of Exhibit A before you filed an emergency injunction in my court? The lawyer swallowed hard. His hands were shaking slightly as he closed his legal pad. He didn't look at Evelyn. Your Honor, the lawyer said, his voice barely a rasp. He took a step away from Evelyn's table. I was provided that document by my client with the assurance of its validity. In light of the evidence presented, I respectfully move to withdraw as counsel for the petitioner effective immediately. You can't do that, Evelyn shrieked, jumping to her feet. Leo began to cry, frightened by the sudden noise. You work for me, I paid you. Motion granted, Judge Miller said flatly. She didn't look at the lawyer again. She turned her gaze to Evelyn. Ms. Davis. The judge said, her voice hard as iron. You have presented a forged document to this court in an attempt to defraud an estate. You have filed false affidavits under penalty of perjury. No, wait, it's a mistake. Evelyn cried out, stepping backward away from the table. She turned toward the gallery. Mom, Dad, tell them. Helen was frozen. Her hands covered her mouth, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. Richard sat perfectly still, staring at the floor, the truth finally breaking through 30 years of blind favoritism. Neither of them moved a muscle to help her. Judge Miller looked at the armed bailiff standing by the door. Take her into custody, the judge ordered. The bailiff unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. He walked briskly across the carpeted floor. Evelyn tried to pull away, clutching Leo to her chest. A second court officer stepped in, gently taking the crying toddler from her arms, before the bailiff grabbed Evelyn's wrists. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking echoed off the wooden walls. Clara! Evelyn screamed, thrashing against the bailiff's grip. Her flawless makeup was ruined, tears of genuine panic streaming down her face. Clara, please tell them to stop. I'm your sister. I stepped out from behind the defense table. I walked down the short aisle, stopping 3 feet away from her. The bailiff paused, holding Evelyn securely by the arms. She looked at me, her chest heaving, waiting for the lifeline she had always received. The bailout. The forgiveness. I looked at the handcuffs cutting into her wrists. Then I looked at her face. Rule number 1 in the military. Evelyn. I said, my voice cold and precise. Never attack without gathering intel. Your will isn't just the wrong date. It's the wrong man. I turned my back on her. Take her out, Judge Miller instructed. The heavy oak doors swung open. The bailiff marched Evelyn out into the hallway, her screams fading as the thick wood sealed shut behind them. In the gallery, Helen finally let out a sound, a hollow, devastated sob. She slipped off the wooden pew, dropping to her knees on the floor of the courtroom. Richard slowly reached down to help her up, his face, gray and aged. David packed the medical records, the CAC logs, and the JAG will back into the black leather portfolio. He zipped it closed. The minefield was clear. The storm that hit Seattle on Friday evening battered the coastal windows with heavy sheets of rain. Inside the house was silent. I sat at the kitchen island, a glass of water in my hand, watching the dark waves crash against the shoreline in the distance. The digital clock on the oven glowed bright green, 8:45. My cell phone vibrated against the quartz surface. It was David. I picked it up. Go ahead. The arraignment is finished. David's voice came through the speaker, crisp and steady over the sound of the storm. The district attorney isn't playing games. Because Evelyn submitted fraudulent documents involving a federally backed VA property, they escalated the charges. Bail was denied. She is spending the weekend in the county facility. I took a slow sip of water. And the appraiser, Greg David, let out a short, dry breath. He didn't even wait for the judge to finish signing the arrest warrant. He cleared out his showroom by 3 o'clock, blocked her number completely. Evelyn apparently used her one phone call from the precinct to try and reach him. It went straight to voicemail. Understood. Get some rest, Clara, David said. The heavy lifting is done. The line clicked off. I set the phone down. 10 minutes later, headlights swept across the living room wall. A car engine idled in my driveway. Car doors slammed shut, followed immediately by the rapid, frantic pounding of the heavy brass knocker against my front door. I walked into the foyer. I didn't turn on the porch light. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just enough to stand in the frame, blocking the entrance entirely. Helen and Richard stood on the wet porch. Helen was unrecognizable. The polished, defensive matriarch from the courtroom was gone. Her hair was plastered to her cheeks by the rain. Her mascara had run down her face in dark, jagged lines, staining the collar of her expensive trench coat. She was shivering violently. Richard stood a step behind her. His shoulders were slumped, his face pale and deeply lined in the shadows. "Clara!" Helen gasped, reaching a trembling hand toward the doorframe. "Please, let us in. We need to talk to you." "We have nothing to discuss," I said, keeping my hand firmly on the edge of the door. "You have to fix this." Helen's voice cracked, escalating into a hysterical pitch. "You have to call your lawyer. Tell the prosecutor you made a mistake. Tell them it was a misunderstanding over Thomas's wishes. If you don't drop this, they are going to send her to prison." "I didn't forge a federal document, Helen," I replied, my voice steady against the howling wind. "I didn't walk into a courtroom and lie to a judge under oath. Evelyn made those choices. The state of Washington is pressing charges now, not me. I couldn't stop it even if I wanted to." "You could talk to the DA," Helen cried out, stepping closer. The rain whipped across the porch, soaking her completely. "You could ask for leniency. She is your sister Clara. She made a stupid mistake because she was desperate. Are you really going to stand there and let this happen to your own flesh and blood?" I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life shielding my sister from the consequences of her own actions. "She tried to steal half of this house," I said flatly. "She stole Thomas's watch. She stood in front of 50 people and tried to destroy the memory of my husband. That wasn't a mistake. That was a calculated strike. She just missed." Richard stepped forward, placing a hand on Helen's shaking shoulder. He looked at me, his eyes hardening with a desperate, misplaced authority. "This has gone far enough, Clara," my father said, his voice dropping into a harsh reprimand. "You proved your point. You won. The house is yours. But if Evelyn goes to a state penitentiary, what happens to Leo? Did you even think about that? Child Protective Services took him from the courthouse. He is going into the foster care system." Helen let out a gut-wrenching sob, covering her face with her hands. "He's going to an orphanage, Clara, a baby. Are you going to let your nephew lose his mother and end up in the system just to punish us?" I watched them deploy their final weapon, the ultimate guilt trip. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out a folded piece of thick, watermarked paper. I unfolded it slowly and held it out. Richard hesitated, then reached out and took the paper. He squinted in the dim light. "Read the header," I instructed. Richard's eyes scanned the top of the page. "State of Washington, Department of Children, Youth and Families." He stopped. His eyes widened. He looked up at me, completely stunned. "I contacted CPS the moment I left the courthouse," I said. The rain continued to fall behind them, but the air on the porch felt incredibly still. "I submitted my background checks, my financial records, and my clearance. The judge signed an emergency placement order 2 hours ago." Helen dropped her hands from her face, staring at me in shock. "What?" "Leo is not in the system," I said. "He is asleep in the guest room upstairs. He has a warm bed, a stable roof, and a future that doesn't involve a mother who uses him as leverage to commit felony fraud." "You can't do that," Helen shrieked, lunging forward. "He belongs with us. We are his grandparents." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I held my ground in the doorway. "You are the people who raised Evelyn," I said, my voice dropping to a low, absolute quiet. "You taught her that rules don't apply to her. You taught her that manipulation is rewarded. You will never have the opportunity to teach those lessons to that little boy." "Clara, please," Richard begged, the authority completely draining from his voice. His hand shook as he held the CPS document. "Don't do this. We're your parents." I looked at them one last time. I saw the rain, the darkness, and the hollow foundation of a family that had collapsed long before Thomas ever died. "You're wrong," I said. "I'm saving my nephew from a fraud, and you are no longer my parents." Isho. I stepped back inside. I grabbed the heavy oak door and pulled it shut. The latch clicked into place with a sharp metallic finality. I threw the deadbolt. Helen began pounding on the wood. Her muffled screams filtered through the thick door, blending with the sound of the storm outside. I stood in the foyer. I didn't walk away immediately. I listened to the pounding, the crying, the desperate demands. Then I took a deep breath. For the first time since the day of the funeral, my chest didn't ache. The air in the house was clear. I turned around and walked up the stairs, leaving the noise of the storm exactly where it belonged. Outside. 8 months later, the winter frost finally surrendered to the Seattle spring. The morning sun broke through the coastal fog, pouring light across the hardwood floors of the living room. I stood at the kitchen island holding a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. I wore an oversized gray cashmere sweater and loose linen pants. My hair hung loose over my shoulders. The house was incredibly quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't press down on your chest but gives you room to breathe. I set my mug down and sifted through the small stack of mail the postman had dropped through the slot earlier that morning. Most of it was junk. Grocery store flyers, a catalog for patio furniture. Near the bottom of the pile was a standard white envelope. The paper was cheap and thin. The return address was stamped in rigid black block letters, Washington Corrections Center for Women. Below that, an inmate identification number followed by the name Evelyn Davis. I didn't open it. I didn't even hold it to the light to see how many pages she had written. I opened the top drawer, pulled out a thick black marker, and drew a single heavy diagonal line across her name. I wrote, "Return to sender," in the top corner and dropped the envelope back into the outgoing mail tray by the front door. My cell phone lit up on the counter. A notification popped onto the screen. A blocked number from a local area code had attempted to leave a voicemail. The automated transcript previewed the first few seconds of audio. "Clara, please, your father's health is failing and we just want to see." I swiped left. I tapped the red trash can icon. The notification vanished. "Peace requires maintenance." I was more than willing to do the work. A soft thump echoed from the top of the stairs. I walked out of the kitchen and looked up at the landing. Leo stood at the top step, gripping the wooden banister with both hands. He was 20 months old now. He wore bright yellow pajamas with cartoon bears on the sleeves. His dark curls were messy from sleep. He saw me, and his face broke into a massive, uninhibited grin. "Down!" he demanded, his voice echoing cheerfully in the high ceilings. "All right," I said, walking up to meet him halfway. "Let's go down." I picked him up, resting his solid weight on my hip. He smelled like baby shampoo and warm cotton. We walked into the kitchen together. I set him in his high chair, and he immediately began tapping his plastic spoon against the tray, a steady, happy rhythm waiting for his oatmeal. He thrived on the routine. He woke up at the same time every day. He ate his meals without the background noise of screaming arguments, collection agency phone calls, or frantic packing to avoid a landlord. He didn't flinch when the doorbell rang anymore. He was safe, completely insulated from the chaotic hurricane of his mother's choices. After breakfast, we went out to the backyard. The grass was damp with morning dew. Leo ran across the lawn, chasing a yellow butterfly that darted over the flower beds. He stumbled, fell onto his hands and knees, and immediately pushed himself back up, giggling. I walked over to the edge of the property near the wooden fence separating the yard from the coastal drop-off. A row of white hydrangea bushes grew thick against the wood. Thomas had planted them the summer we moved in. I carefully snapped a single perfect white bloom from the stem. I watched Leo play for a few more minutes, letting the coastal breeze clear the last remnants of sleep from my mind. Then I called him back toward the deck. We went inside, wiping our feet on the mat. I walked into the living room and stopped in front of the stone fireplace. A framed photograph of Thomas sat on the heavy oak mantel. It was taken during a hiking trip in the Cascades. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt, squinting into the sunlight, his smile relaxed and genuine. I placed the fresh white hydrangea on the wood next to the silver frame. His vintage Rolex was locked securely in the heavy steel safe upstairs. The deed to this house was locked in a vault downtown solely in my name, with a clear succession plan for the boy currently playing with wooden blocks on the rug behind me. His legacy was intact. His name was unblemished. I touched the edge of the silver frame, lingering for just a second before turning back to the living room to sit on the floor with my nephew. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone to walk all over you. Sometimes the best way to protect your family is to permanently remove the people who use the word family as a weapon. If you discovered your own sibling plotting to steal your home with forged documents, would you let the legal system send them to prison, or would you settle it quietly behind closed doors to keep the peace? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found satisfaction in this story, please like and subscribe to hear more.